Today's message is Exodus chapter 6 verses 10 to 13, and the title is Stick with God's Plan. Last time we looked at the earlier verses of chapter 6, and we noted the discouragement. We read it in verse 9. God reinforced and reiterated his promises to Moses. The people have become frustrated with Moses. Moses goes back to God, verse 22, chapter 5, and says, "Why, Lord, have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me?" And you can sense the frustration in the voice of Moses. Then God speaks to Moses, and it's a wonderful passage, Exodus 6, verses 1 to 8, and we get all of those wonderful promises that God gives to Moses, and we read them. I will bring you out of slavery to the Egyptians. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm, and so on. And we read when Moses goes back, verse 9, Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they did not listen to him because of their discouragement and harsh labor. Remember, they were in slavery, and because Moses initially had gone to Pharaoh and said, repeated God's words, "Let my people go," Pharaoh took the straw away and told them to keep the quota. But Exodus 6 verses 10 to 13, we read this: "Then the Lord said to Moses, Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of this country." But Moses said to the Lord, "If the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips?" And then verse 13, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt." And then we get a long list of names which are mentioned. And of course, this passage reminds us of the importance of encouragement and of God's timing and encouragement to Moses. At times, it seems hard to stick to God's plan. Even when we bring it into New Testament language, go and make disciples of all men, and we think of the opposition, we think of the hardship and the sacrifice that involves. But here the message simply was to Moses, stick with the original plan. God's command, stand firm. God's instruction is simple: go tell Pharaoh. Even though Pharaoh had already refused and the Israelites had lost hope, God's plan doesn't change because of human resistance or apparent failure. And this is what we have to learn, as well as Moses had to learn in the book of Exodus. His word remains steadfast. Like Moses, we may want to stop when obedience doesn't seem to work, at least on the surface. But faithfulness means continuing to obey God's words even when we don't see results. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9, "Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." Galatians 6 verse 9. So the encouragement today from the life of Moses is let's not give up. Jesus too faced repeated rejection, but continually faithfully fulfilled his mission. He steadfast, he set his face to go to Jerusalem, and that was to go to the cross in order to provide us with salvation from the forgiveness of sins. Jesus had to keep going, even in the face of rejection from his own people, and sometimes even the disciples didn't get it. God's plan often requires perseverance in the face of opposition. Secondly, Moses' discouragement leads to God's grace. In verse 12, Moses says, "I am of uncircumcised lips." He's not only doubting his speaking ability, as in Exodus chapter 4 verse 10, now he feels unworthy for the task itself. And we've seen this several times with Moses. God does not call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Feelings of inadequacy don't disqualify us. They actually position us or make us in a position where we have to rely on God's strength. 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, God said to Paul, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 1 Corinthians 1, 26, 27, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Peter denied the Lord 3 times, yet God restored him and used him mightily. John 21 is the chapter of his restoration publicly. Peter's weakness, like Moses, became the stage for God's power. Thirdly, God's command was reaffirmed despite Moses' objections. The Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron and gave them a command. God doesn't debate Moses' fears. In fact, we don't see that at any point in the book of Exodus. He simply reaffirms the mission. Obedience is not optional when God speaks. His commands are not suggestions, but divine assignments to be fulfilled. If you love me, keep my commandments. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus prayed, "Not my will, but yours be done." Obedience to God's will, even though through suffering, brought salvation to the world through the life of Christ. And lastly, it was a faith that Moses had to develop that enabled him to persevere. God was shaping Moses' endurance, building him the strength to obey through repeated challenges. And before Moses could lead Israel through the Red Sea, he had to learn to stand firm in faith despite rejection. James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." Just as God built endurance in Moses, he built it in the early apostles who continued to preach despite persecution. The early chapters of Acts chapter 4 and Acts chapter 14, Paul encouraged the Christians, saying, through many testings, we must enter the kingdom of God. And so as we finish, are you tempted to give up because obedience seems fruitless? Do you feel too weak or unworthy to do what God has called you to do? Remember, God's command still stands. Your job is to trust and obey. His job is to bring the results. Faith is not proven in easy success, but in steady obedience when nothing seems to change. Thank you for listening.